My name is Chris Fabian, and today's webinar is a continuation of our series on financial scenario planning and how to model various scenarios that could be coming up in the future, and also how to start to test or plot solutions against each of the scenarios. Whereas over the past few weeks with GFOA and Shane Kavanaugh in that webinar series, we definitely talked conceptually about how this could be done, and we've rolled out our own fiscal health tool and training to organizations to begin to plot out their financial forecasts. The webinar today is designed to bring two current practitioners, Kathleen Von Achen from the Unified Government of Kansas City, Kansas and Wyandotte County, and Jamie Roush from Branson, Missouri, who are actively doing it, so that we can start to hear from practitioners how it's going, what some of their tips might be as they start to not only put together models, but begin to communicate them with staff and elected officials overall. So we're also fortunate to have you both here, Kathleen and Jamie, and very much look forward to hearing your perspectives and also giving the audience members an opportunity to ask questions of you, and we'll do that as we get to the end of today's webinar. I'm just going to begin with a quick introduction to fiscal health scenario planning, modeling, and developing solutions. In our audience today, we have a nice mix of organizations who are in the fiscal health scenario planning program with us, and we have organizations who are brand new to the concept. So it'd be good to kind of get a basic lay of the land overall. I'm going to speak for just a few minutes, and then we'll allow Kathleen to make her opening presentation. Jamie will follow. There is a possibility that Don Hudson from Tualatin, Oregon may still be able to join us. He was our third panel presenter, and just moments before the call, Don had to be pulled away to a board meeting. So he is a possibility for a late arrival, but that's okay. For introductory remarks, our approach to managing resources strategically as best as possible in the midst of the pandemic and planning for recovery has really centered on three main strategies. Our first, which is the focus of today, is the need for organizations to recognize that there is just immense uncertainty for how the recovery could play out and the impacts to the economy. We have some organizations who, to the best of their abilities, put together their economic forecasts, predicted revenue shortfalls back in March, and have come to find out that their revenue projections are maybe, their projections were half as bad as they turned out to be, meaning the problems are twice as substantial. And it's not anybody's fault. It's a recognition that the scenario that we're living in is fast evolving, so always continually changing, and therefore financial scenario planning allows us to accept that and say, to the best of our ability, we're going to plot plausible futures, knowing that we're most likely going to be wrong, and start to stack up solutions relative to each scenario so that we're as best prepared as possible for whatever might be able to play out. And that will be the focus of today. The second component that we've been talking about, which will be less of a focus today, is once you quantify the economic ramification, the financial ramification of the shortfalls that you're facing, how do we bring into play real programmatic data to understand our service level choices that we might be able to make that stack up and are appropriate for each of the possible scenarios. We have in our website and our YouTube channel several of the webinars that have focused on the program-based business intelligence, how to develop a list of programs you offer and their costs, and most importantly, your options for changing those various services. And finally, our third point is looking much more long-term at regional partnership solutions on a programmatic level as a means to optimize the scarce resources that we have. But again, our focus today is going to be specifically on point one, financial scenario planning and developing strategies and solutions overall. For those of you who have been along for the ride with us over the last probably 6 to 8 weeks, we started with our webinar with GFOA to examine the practice of scenario planning and to start to sketch out to the best of our abilities what various plausible scenarios might look like, from a short V and bounce back all the way to more of a long-term recession and various scenarios in between. And from this series of webinars with GFOA, we've also followed up with both GFOA and ICMA to begin to survey organizations on how they are approaching scenario planning. This is one of the pieces of data from our survey demonstrating that most organizations are now at least bringing up their financial scenarios on a monthly basis. The organizations who are doing it on a weekly basis, if I were to show you the same survey data from just 2 weeks ago, the amount of organizations doing weekly updates was less than 20%, and now it has moved up past 30%. So our takeaway is that more and more organizations are updating their forecasts on a far more frequent basis, in this case on a weekly basis, and that's been quite interesting. Our overall point is that for all of us who have kind of looked at a V-shaped recovery, there are certain types of solutions that most of us have already deployed, things that GFOA recommended, such as deferring one-time expenses, freezing hiring, suspending vacancies, and in some cases even deploying furloughs overall in order to immediately buy time, balance the equation for our budget, and allow us to now start planning for more longer-term solutions and strategies for what a W, or a return of infections, could look like by fall or winter, a double hit to our economies, or something that is more long-term and substantial like an L. One of the further questions in our survey was, what types of financial scenarios are organizations modeling? And whereas, again, just about 2 weeks ago, the vast majority of our organizations were modeling the little V, a short dip in the economy followed by a rapid recovery, or a big V, we're seeing more and more, actually the leading scenario that organizations are modeling, according to our survey, is now more of the L-shaped. The revenues have dropped and the recovery is much more longer term. We've seen that described as a Nike swoosh from some organizations. And emerging out of nowhere, last 2 weeks, there were 0% of respondents who had suggested that this was a scenario that they were looking at, but something like a string of V's where the economy is open again, and perhaps we might prepare for a temporary closing if infection rates increase. Then we fix the problem and open the economy, and then it closes. In fact, the New York Times had this article demonstrating that this might be something about this one scenario, of course nobody knows, of our foreseeable future, where this is a string of V's, periods of social distancing, perhaps lasting out towards 2021, 2022. The hope is that this doesn't materialize, of course, but from a financial scenario planning perspective, it's wise to be aware of what the economic ramifications would be if this does indeed play out. And our whole premise was how to start to model what this could look like, so that if we do have a revenue shortfall and deploy some variety of measures to reduce expenses, as more certainty becomes clear on future scenarios, that we'll always be prepared with new solutions to be able to address what could happen in a more dire financial situation. So with that, I did want to pause my screen, and we'll get to the first presenter on the list who has been applying financial scenario planning. And I will stop my screen share and invite Kathleen to go ahead and share her screen overall and demonstrate some of the work that they're doing in Kansas City, Kansas. Kathleen, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay. There. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? So I'm the Chief Financial Officer for Kansas City, Kansas. Actually, it's the unified government of Wyandotte County, Kansas City, Kansas. And so about 20 years ago, the city and the county merged together. We're not really a consolidated, we're consolidated, but we still have separate county general fund and a separate city general fund. So it makes our financial development or budget development rather challenging because we have a lot of different funds. So we're an organization, the total budget is around $400 million. We have 2,500 employees. So pretty big organization. And of the 400 million, 230 million of it is in our combined city, county, parks, general funds. And so a good chunk of that is, for basic services provided by a city and a county. So our commission is made up of about 12 or 11 elected officials, and they're very engaged and like to have lots of data and like the transparency. And over the course of the years, the 4 years I've been with the unified government, we have been able to get them on board with revising the fiscal policies, and they're very supportive of having a good reserve. So we're working all in union along those lines. So this is a big challenge for us, this reduction in our revenues over the entire organization. We're expecting to lose $50 million over the future 18-month period. Today, I'm just going to focus on the city general fund because the city general fund is very dependent on sales tax. So 4 or 5 years ago, or the last 4 years, they kept decreasing the mill rate. And so our reliance on property tax diminished, and now we're more reliant on sales tax, sadly. And this pandemic is really impacting sales tax because it's very economically sensitive. So in order, the commission really likes to see lots of charts and graphs. So I worked with Eric on putting together this model very quickly. So of course, an organization of our size, we have thousands and thousands of accounts, but rather than loading all those accounts into this model, what I chose to do in order to make it quicker was to basically include 3 or 4 prior years of actual data, but through a pivot table that I put together just to have it summarized by revenue and major revenue and expenditure category. So those thousands and thousands of accounts were, basically reduced down to maybe, well, because in the model I've put in the city, the general fund, the county general fund, and the parks general fund, as well as the combined general fund. So there's kind of 4 funds in there, and each of the funds have roughly 30 categories or accounts. So it made it a lot easier to get this model going. And so if it's something that you want to use, I'm planning on using this as a tool for the commission to visually see, the impact of the pandemic, and then to model maybe some initiatives that would diminish the impact. So that's my role in this. I'm not necessarily using this model as a specific financial planning tool because of the complexity of the organization. I find that my Excel long-range financial planning modules are, for me, just more flexible. So, but this is actually, for me, a tool for the commission to see and to look at initiatives. So I'm going to show you a little bit here. What I have on the screen is, I'm going to make it bigger, is the city general fund. And I'm going to move this down. Okay. So this is the city general fund, and what I've done is a baseline in order for them to see, and you can select, and then I have two other scenarios, a best case and a worst case for the city general fund. I also have in here the county general fund, so you can see the county general fund. And then here's the parks general fund, which is a lot smaller. And then here is the main, all combined, the combined general fund. But the city general fund is most impacted, so it's more dramatic. So, so this is the baseline, and of course, if you go to the best case, then you can see that V that he's talking about. I too have been considering revising my revenue estimate for 2021. I'm not sure I'm quite at the L stage, but you know, it's possible. Yeah, so maybe this afternoon I'll revise my revenue estimate for that. Now, so I'm deselecting, I've just deselected the initiatives that I have loaded in here. And so you can see how the best case scenario, we have that decline in revenue in the blue line. This light shaded area is where the baseline is. And then that's the effect of at a best case scenario. Then my worst case, and by loading these worst and best cases, all you need to do, you don't actually have to deal with dollars. You can just enter in percentage changes from your baseline. So, which I thought was very helpful. As you walk through it, you can do it either way when you enter in, but you know, when you do the training, you'll see. This is the worst case that I have here. Now, and then, wait, all those, there's the worst case without any of the solutions. So, what we've initially loaded are 4 possible basic solutions. We haven't entered in all our different initiatives, but the initiatives I've entered in are, you know, reducing other operating expenditures to 19, maybe doing a hiring slowdown, reducing cash projects and equipment. So those are all just very basic beginning ones. So as we are planning on doing a presentation tomorrow night, and all of our other initiatives will be on there by then. But this is what I've got in here so far. And it's fairly easy to add in initiatives. You know, over here in the initiatives tab, you just add an initiative, and you know, here's how it looks, and you just kind of enter in if it's one time or ongoing, is it a revenue or expense, then you put a little note and you close. So it's really pretty easily done. I did want to tell you that the commission really thought this was very valuable, and so but we didn't have enough time for them to really dig into it. So they asked me to put some snips together of all the various initiatives. And so this is a little PowerPoint I sent to them. And so this is this gave them a chance to really study it longer. And so for example, I've got the baseline here, and then here's the city general fund baseline. And then here's the best case, right? With no expenditure reductions. And then here's some initial expenditure reductions and how it looks. And so, you know, I just provided this information to them so that they could had a chance to look at it, you know, at home and over the weekends. And so, of course, they, you know, then they can see that that zero, that it's dropping below the zero, and, you know, and really study this a little closer. I don't know if this is helpful, but, you know, I was able to put this model together fairly quickly with Chris and Liz's help at at the Center for Priority-Based Budgeting and ResourceX, and I found it very valuable. We plan to use it again on Thursday night. So, anything else you wanted me to add?
Kathleen, that's great. As you move into Thursday's presentation, just keeping in mind the fact that more organizations, at least in our survey, are doing more frequent updating. Do you have, I'm curious, what are is the update going to include just an update on the revenue forecast, or as you mentioned, there are new initiatives that are coming up. How's that going? Are the initiatives coming from you, from the commission, from staff? I'd just be curious how that update's going to take place.
Yeah. So on May 7th, I did a revenue update that was almost like an economics update on the economy. And so when I did that, I wanted to give them some context. So I actually really focused on looking at sales tax by retail sector. And then I compared it with how that performed during the Great Recession so that they could have some context. And then I also pointed out that, frankly, what we're experiencing now isn't at all like the Great Recession. But when you talk about this, people want to have some context. So that's what I did. And we spent quite like an hour and a half in the public meeting going through the revenue estimates. I think that it's important for the commission to have some real confidence in the revenue estimates. And I also made it very clear that they're going to be constantly changing. So for tonight, though, I'm going to try and not focus too much on the revenues because we kind of did that enough. And this is a draft presentation, but what I wanted to show them was how the financial statements are kind of looking. And so and how it's impacting my other funds, right? And the fact that if we don't address some of these deficits in these other funds, that it's all going to go back to the general fund because the general fund ultimately is responsible for covering deficits in other funds, if you're not an enterprise fund. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about, here's all the deficits to give them a tally. I put together some budget strategies or principles that we're going to be following as we go through and look at initiatives and budget balancing initiatives. And, kind of give them some information on how the targeted deferrals, we're calling them, which are the reductions to the 2019 actuals, how just doing that isn't going to cover it even close. It's only $1.5 million. And looking at some other options, but and then kind of giving them some information on what the balance of our emergency reserve is. I'm going to look at that. And then finally, I'm just kind of give them a tally. I'm still working on this PowerPoint, so it looks doesn't look real fancy right now, but just a tally of what it's going to take, various initiatives, and how much in personnel adjustments we're going to need to make. So that, that's what we're doing. And then after I do that, then we're going to call up this fiscal health tool and start showing the initiatives and how they look on the graph.
I think that's really cool. Yeah, you can stack them up and see if they're adding up to what you're going to need based on your projections. I think that's perfect.
Yeah.
Really cool. Well, thank you. If you wouldn't mind, this kind of design panel discussion, if you would hang on tight for some Q&A.
Yes.
And we'll move on to Jamie Rauch's perspective. Jamie, let's see here. Kathy, you might need to stop sharing your screen.
I did.
Okay. And Jamie, if you can try to share your screen.
Okay, Chris, can you see it?
I can hear you. And let's see here. I don't believe that your screen is shared.
Okay, give me one second. Sorry.
No problem. That's great. And for everybody, while Jamie's getting her screen set up and is about to tell her story, please feel free, as you have questions, to list in the chat. And then we'll open it up to more of a panel discussion after Jamie gets a chance to present what she's been working on.
Sorry, Chris. Give me 1 second. I know it's short.
No problem at all. It's life in Zoom land.
What went wrong?
I think you're making
How about
progress.
that? Sorry.
You're up and running. You're good to go.
Okay. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I will just be very quick because I had that little problem. Sorry. One of the things, I'm going to enter it from a different approach. I appreciate the webinars, and I appreciate to know what our financial organizations are doing in an effort to help our city, as I'm sure you all are doing. The city of Branson, most of you probably know, is a high tourism. We do about 82% is about tourism. And so when something like COVID-19 hits us, we have to go into direct self-sustaining mode, if you will. And so that fiscal health tool has really played a very important part into what we do, into how that we are able to inform our community and hopefully sustain ourselves through this time. Just a really quick overview. I know everybody, you probably already know this, but I wanted to share my perspective on the fiscal health tool. Before I go into my PowerPoint presentation, the fiscal health tool provides an overall picture of the financial health of our city. And when our leaders came to me, pretty much our mayor did a declaration, and then our governor did a declaration, and pretty much shut our businesses down. And right as our tourism was starting to pick up, it was extremely important for us to move in the direction of fiscal health and how are we going to sustain it. And so immediately we went to our fiscal health tool to get that picture and what it looks like. The fiscal health tool also provides a history of our actual expenditures and revenues, as well as our future budget and projections. It makes it way easier to identify trends because you already have your historical information in there. You also already have future forecasted information based upon, I don't know about all the rest of you, but we do 5 years every year when we're doing the budget, and we balance our current budget. We also balance 5 years in the future for our major funds. And so we're able to put that into the fiscal health tool to allow for better strategic planning, better financial picture. And so in the past, the way I've used this fiscal health tool is to be able to show during budget time and to be able to show our city officials basically the decisions that you make, here's how it's going to affect our future. And so it's extremely important. And they've come to, I've heard it several years. No, Jamie said 2 years ago, and she showed us that picture from that tool. I've heard that many, many times. So as a result of that, they've seen this fiscal health tool over a couple of years, and they come to say, hey, how is it going to look, or what is it going to look like? It gives us the option to see the growth of our one-time expenditures and our ongoing expenditures, and that piece was extremely important to us as well. We separate our ongoing and our one-time, as many I'm sure of you do, but in a time of natural disasters, and for those of you who don't know the city of Branson, we've had some tornado disasters, we've had many floods, and we've had to acclimate to some of these issues. And so this health tool has been extremely important to be able to help us to see, here's all our one-time expenditures, and here's our capital and those kind of things. What in the world are we going to do? Well, the first things that we're going to do is we're going to go and we're going to look at all of our non-essential expenditures. And by having this health tool and by having the one-time and the capital and the ongoing separated and being able to see it, you can see really quickly that your one-time expenditures are the things that you're going to stop doing. And you're going to try and maintain those ongoing expenditures because that's what maintains your ongoing operations for the city. So the fiscal health tool also helps define how, where, and on what we spend our funds, and you've probably heard Chris say that several times, so I just wanted to reiterate that because I will tell you in just a few minutes how we use that. It also gives the ability to easily and quickly analyze our financial impact, which was hugely important. Again, the financial impact and the current year and the long range, that was incredible. New available revenues right now, that is on hold. Loss of revenues, that is where we're going to give it to you here in just a second as I go through this PowerPoint and what we did. And the most important thing that I feel the fiscal health tool brings to the table is it enables our leadership to visualize what the scenarios do as far as expenditure and revenues. Do we have available revenues on the table that we can use, or how are the current and the future year reserves affected? And so what we can do is through strategic planning and through some of our financial presentations to the board, we can show them, and our city administrator and our assistant city administrator, we came together actually it was the very next day after our mayor made the declaration to sit down at the table, and I was able to bring up this fiscal health tool to show them the impacts and what's going to happen. So I'm going to move to my PowerPoint presentation to try to not be so long-winded. Sorry. So here's our fiscal health update. This is what I presented to the board, and we've had ongoing discussions as a result. Really quickly, some of the first steps that we went through was our revenue assumptions. In a tourism city, immediately when these kind of things happen and these stay-at-home orders are initiated, what do you immediately think is the very first thing that families are going to cut from their budget is vacations and things to go spend on entertainment, because they themselves have to look at their family budgets to determine what's going to keep them ongoing instead of their one time. And we would be their one time, we would be their vacation. So we knew that almost immediately our revenues were going to start reducing. And so we put together some scenarios through the fiscal health tool to look at those assumptions. I also have built a cash flow model that really helps us see our cash flow on a monthly basis to determine what's going to happen there as well. And that fits in very well with our fiscal health tool. So basically, what we were looking at as a city is, what do you do with your revenue assumptions? One of the things, I am a very conservative person in nature, and we immediately said, what's the worst case scenario here? The worst case scenario, you can't get any worse than zero, okay, so as far as revenues go. So we looked at the months that we were currently in and looked at how it was going to affect our city and what we were being told as to how long this thing is going to go on. So we assumed from March to July's activity, we assumed 0 sales tax revenue dollars. We figured you can't get worse than that. June and July are our largest months as far as revenue. If we zeroed those out, how is that going to affect us, and can we sustain ourselves? Again, that was a scenario we're able to build into that fiscal health tool. The second thing that we did was we, like I said, developed the scenarios as far as our expenditures, and we went through them to determine, now that we have 5 months of activity zeroed out, what percentage of revenue loss is that going to be for the year? That equated to about 45 to 50% revenue loss for the entire year. And then what we did was we determined, based on those models, how long it was going to take us to recover based upon the forecast for every month. So we did that by determining, okay, here's our revenues, here is this fiscal health model, here's what our projections are, and our departments went through and they cut all of their non-essential, they cut capital, they cut everything, down to just their ongoing operations. And then we saw how it was going to look. So I'm going to move through. Here's our assumptions. Revenue is March through July. No sales tax revenue equates to 45%. All non-tax revenues assumed. And these are all the expenditure reductions that we did. We did a hiring freeze. We furloughed 10 part-time positions. We did not hire on our 68 seasonal positions. We cut all capital spending. We reduced our materials and our contractor costs as well. So the low-hanging fruit on our ongoing operations were travel expenses, as I'm sure it is for all of you, meals and lodging, clothing and uniform, supplies, those kind of things that we could say, hey, yes, we can do without this year. in an effort to sustain ourselves in the future. Those are the things that we looked at. We plugged it into the model. We looked at, okay, this thing is going to take us, if we're out this month, how long is it going to take us to recover? And then we did that for those 5 months. So we determined for 20 to 24 months in the event that we really start picking back up in August and moving forward. So I'll move forward. And this is just a quick picture. I wanted to show it all to you on how we use the tool and how we present it to our community. And so we did a page for all of our major funds and all of our sales tax funds that were going to be immediately affected by this. And if you can tell, you can read on this report, we gave the revenues, and obviously there's a V, and we gave our expenditures, and you can see that. And then we told them what the expected unreserved fund balance was going to be at the end of 2020 with all our assumptions built in. We are still able to maintain a 23% reserve. And the reason why, I will add, is because we have a 20% code for our reserves of operating expenditures, but we just passed in 2018 a public safety tax. So what we were able to do is move the public safety expenditures out and put it into their own fund. So our general fund had accumulated a little bit more. We had about a 34% reserve, which was fantastic, because when you're a city that is prone to a lot of flooding, and you're prone to some tornadoes, and you're prone to some of those things, you need to prepare. And we do 20%. A lot of the times we try to maintain 10% on top of that for opportunity costs, is what we call it. This is just a picture of what we showed the board, and then I went through and then I explained that. And we did it for public safety as well. We showed them what the subsidies were going to be. Public safety is still subsidized by our general fund. We showed them the overall percentages. We showed them the major cuts, and also we showed the graphs that came out of the health tool to show them what was going to happen pre-COVID versus post-COVID. Here's our Parks Fund. Same example all the way across, and you can see that. And I just wanted to show you the picture of how we use the tool, and really to explain to you all that one of the things, we have after action review, and the main point that we were able to drive home with this after action review was, had we not had this fiscal health tool in place already, and we had not been using it already, we would kind of be hurting and scrambling and trying to do all these calculations and figure it all out. But because we had already been using it for other areas and other positions, we were able to immediately, within the very next day after our mayor sent a declaration, we were able to go sit down with some of our leaders and show them and see how it was going to affect not only this year, but also our future. Now, the second thing I just wanted to add really quickly was, in our after action review, what we looked at is, okay, in our state, I don't know about all of you, but in our state, they are planning and anticipating a second wave. And so what do we need to do for the second wave preparation? Well, that second wave, what that tells me is that those zeroed out revenues from March through July, that's great. But what are we going to do when it hits us again in September and October? Good Lord willing, that does not happen. However, we have to plan for the worst and hope for the best, right? So that's kind of what we did, and that's what we're doing right now as we speak. We're also looking at different ways and different ideas with the fiscal health tool to update it quarterly and to bust it out, and so that we're more timely with our information, and so that they can see it live and what's happening and what we look to. So I really wanted to just give you some ideas of how you can use this tool and really what the city of Branson is doing. As I said, we're involved in looking at the second wave preparation. I will give you just a quick update. Remember when I said we zeroed out these revenues, March through July activity, which for us, because of a 2-month time lag, is May through September's receipts. So it's what we receive in May through September, but it's actual activity from March through July. We've already gotten March's money. Yes, it was down compared to last year, not near as much. And guess what? Since I planned for zero, we were only down 25% to last year. So actually, our new financial planning, we're that much ahead. Does that make sense? So I'm hopeful that that's what's going to happen. Our businesses are opening much quicker than what we planned. Over the last couple of weeks, we've seen, and I don't know, depending on what your thoughts are, whether this is good or bad, but we have seen people from all over the country here. Obviously, our state is still doing the distancing. All of our businesses, they have all planned for the new norm now, and so all of those things are taking place. But in addition to what we've seen is that people are tired of being at home, so they want somewhere to go. We have 3 lakes, and we have a lot of tourism, and so they're coming here knowing that it's probably not going to be like it used to be, but they're checking out the new norms. And so we're actually doing better than what we anticipated, which I'm thankful for, and hopefully we can continue that in the future. Chris, that's it. Thank you.
That's awesome. Jamie, thank you for so much information and such a great perspective. And this report was just such a nice, concise way of summarizing everything that you had put together. For anybody in the audience, please feel free to type your questions in the chat or come off mute if you have a question, and we can field them for either Jamie or Kathleen and their experiences overall. While we wait, go ahead for that to take place, questions to generate. Jamie, first question for you that I had was, for the report that you created, who has been the audience and how have they reacted to what you put together?
Well, I will say our city leaders and our public has been our audience. And so first, obviously, with our city administrator and our assistant city administrator, then it went to the board, and then it went to the public. And we have gotten great feedback from it, from every business people in our community to our Board of Aldermen. They very much appreciated it. We got it out very quickly, and they were easily able to understand it. They appreciated it, and they're looking forward to what we're going to do in the future. So I'm thankful for that.
That's really great. Thanks. Eric has posted that document from Branson in the chat as well. So please check out that link. It's a really incredible report. And again, please feel free to ask your own questions in the chat, and we'll keep up the dialogue for any tips that you all might have. I think that's really fascinating that it was not only to the board, but to the public as well, to start keeping everybody informed of the financial reality that we're planning for. Kathleen, back to you. I had a question. I know in some of our dialogue about your May 7th presentation, which was just a couple weeks ago, you were describing how, as you talked to the board, this might have been, it's heavy news one way or the other, but you have a good way of communicating, number one, and number two, you had some visuals. Can you describe for others who are maybe thinking about how they present this information, what were your tips? How did you approach it, and what was their reaction?
Well, so I can show you the PowerPoint that I did. Do you want to see it a little bit? Sure. Let's see. So I actually drew from some of my approach came from having watched a webinar put on by the California Society of Municipal Finance Officers, because I used to work in California and am familiar with them. And so what I wanted to do first was just give them some context of knowing what the current base was and how the existing economy was before we entered into this. And then I launched into letting them know that we should expect the worst, or expect the best, but plan for the worst and prepare to be surprised, right? So kind of talked in economic terms about what our forecast included, some of the assumptions in that, and what we expect to see in the future. Of course, that was a month ago, so we might actually be changing these assumptions. And, gave them lots of visuals of how it looks, and, some idea of by quarter and by sector what we felt was going to be happening in our community. And then try to make some comparisons with the Great Recession, although, as I mentioned, it's not exactly the same because we've never shut the U.S. economy down before. So, for example, by sector, here's how grocery stores look during the Great Recession, and this is what we are expecting to see this year. So, restaurants, mercantile, department stores, automobiles. And then also, since we don't really have unemployment data yet from the state of Kansas, we identified some vulnerable sectors where many of our residents are employed in, and the level of employment in those sectors that are vulnerable. And then just talking a little bit about the assumptions behind how it's going to look for reopening, and touched a little bit on property tax, which explained, explaining why we don't think property tax is going to be greatly impacted. So just giving them lots of information, on the revenues a little bit. I asked them a poll question, how they felt after knowing this information, how much did they feel the revenues are going to go down by. And then I just gave them the revenue impact at a very high level, very summary, because at that point we were still developing the individual detail, and made it clear that and then just made it clear that we're going to be doing updates every few weeks. And then this is when I launched into the fiscal health model. And then we opened up that website and got and went there. So that's the approach I took with our revenues, rather than having lots of tables with too many numbers on them. Lots of graphs.
I think it's great. I mean, you provided a ton of information. I love the context, comparing it one by one to the Great Recession and saying this is unlike the Great Recession. And likely to be worse. We've never shut the entire economy down, and then all of it built into where you are then plugging it into the model, which is the punchline overall. How's this all going to turn out?
Right.
That's really cool. Eric Keck, if you wouldn't mind coming off mute, you had a really good question, and it showed up in our survey data that many organizations, at least for this first wave, have been trying to exhaust. It's not low-hanging fruit, but it's the immediately actionable stuff. Freezing vacancies, taking a serious look at one-time spend, and as we move past the things that are more immediately actionable, our survey participants are saying they're getting into program and service discussions about, okay, if this continues down this path, how might we rethink how we're delivering services? And I just want to turn over to you, if you wouldn't mind kind of explaining your question a little bit for each of the participants.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. And thank you, Kathleen and Jamie, for your participation today. Great presentations from both of you. My question is this: obviously, you're using the fiscal health tool to ascertain where your organization sits currently, but are you also now utilizing your programmatic-based business intelligence data, your priority-based budgeting data, to sit down as an organization and do some projections there if, in fact, you had to do some more drastic cuts or targeted service postponement or pausing of services? Are you sitting down now to plan for that as well?
This is Jamie, so I will answer first just really quickly. Of course we are. That would be my answer. We are using PBB more so than we ever have. We've used it for the last, I believe, 5 or 6 years, but we just came off of a meeting with all of our department heads and talking about after action reviews, and in that I gave that presentation about PBB and what it does and how we're going to do it. And we have looking at what I still call the quartiles. I don't know if you still call them that or not, Chris, but the 3 and 4 quartiles, those things that don't do anything that go towards achieving our results, they're programs that we can look at. And what I told them is that those are hard discussions because people are afraid of change sometimes, but they're needed discussions, especially in times like these. So we had those discussions, and we looked at several programs, and we've already moved forward with a couple, and then we have a couple of more that are out there that are going to save us like $300,000 and $400,000 annually. That is a little bit more hard of a pill to swallow, but they're moving in the right direction, and I'm looking forward to what the outcome is going to be. Thank you.
No, thank you, Jamie.
So the unified government is not as far along with PBB as Branson is. So we certainly have all our cost data, our programs inventoried and costing done. All the scoring have been completed, and so we're now just in the cusp of actually evaluating all our programs and determining which ones we can pursue for further evaluation. We did do a survey with our commission, and which was really interesting. And we did a little Survey Monkey. They went and we gave them the blueprint. So there was every program and all the detail for each one. And the commissioners actually went through and they got to vote on whether it's a red light, a yellow light, or a green light. And what we found is that what they thought also supported the scoring that we did through the staff level. So that validated the data. And so I think now we're going to be starting to look at each of the programs. I think there's a function where you can go in and give every program a destiny. And so that's the point where we are, is giving programs a destiny. So.
Very cool. And that is that every program has a future, the destiny. Liz and I are chatting. We've never heard it described like that. That'll be the new Kathleen terminology. The program destiny is epic. This is from the survey data, and for organizations who are kind of moving past just a traditional V recovery and really looking at, like Jamie was saying, what could happen in a further economic decline in the fall or winter. All of the solutions shifted from more line item based to everything was about program solutions. How can we do something more efficiently? How can we decrease it even temporarily? Just like Kathleen saying, the red light, green light review, that's pretty cool. And I had not seen it done like that before, but that is to have a programmatic database to start with and say, we're going to go through every single service and have this discussion, just like Jamie's doing in her reviews as well. Definitely powerful. Thank you. A couple more minutes left. Anybody from the audience have some question that you would love to ask of either of the participants? All right, no problem. We've recorded this session, and we will make sure that you have access to it. We have on our website, we post the recorded version along with the blog overall. But I wanted to just invite everyone to say thank you to Kathleen and Jamie for taking the time today to share how they're applying fiscal health scenario planning into their analysis of what's taking shape, how they're communicating this data, this important message and getting everybody on board to understand the ramifications. And then, as Eric Keck brought up, then they're also applying programmatic data to help to work on their solutions. We are going to continue to be offering the fiscal health trainings on our website. We have this, actually tomorrow is a forecasting training in the tools. Friday is our open hours. You can register for those classes for free online. And then next Tuesday will be cohort 11. We've done, it'll be week 10, cohort 11 next week. So meaning 10 straight weeks of doing the fiscal health onboarding for organizations who are coming along. So please feel free to join us there. And then Jamie and Kathleen, if you wouldn't mind typing in, if you're up for it, your email addresses into chat for anybody who has some direct follow-up with Jamie and Kathleen, that would be outstanding. But just thank you both. We consider you the top of the top and leaders in how you're doing financial planning, and just cannot be more grateful for your participation today. Thanks, everybody. We have another webinar next week, next Wednesday, and it will be on some of the rapid implementation. It's extremely exciting of how organizations have gone from ground zero to programmatic data, programmatic costing data, and basic program attributes. We're working with Cleveland Heights, Ohio right now. They're in 3 days into their work. They're at 30% cost allocation for their programs, over 400 programs identified. So tune in next week to see how you might participate as well, if you're not already, into the program-based business intelligence cohort style implementation. With that, I'll sign off and say thank you so much and have a good rest of your day.